BMW Motorcycle Owners of America present the Short Wheelbase Podcast. With members in all 50 states, Canada, and across the globe, the BMW MOA invites you to ride inspired. Learn more about membership benefits, including roadside assistance, tire hazard protection, and more at bmwmoa.org. The Short Wheelbase Podcast is also brought to you by Boxer 2 Valve, supplier of quality OEM and aftermarket parts and specialty tools, and by Air Support BMW, offering premium driveline rebuilding and performance enhancements for your air-cooled BMW.
Here we are, episode 3 of the Short Wheelbase Podcast. Welcome, everyone. Today we have, let's see here. I'm looking at my notes to make sure I don't miss anything. Today we have an excerpt from the longer podcast with Mark Francois. We, of course, have the garage updates, as we always do. And
Indeed.
I will be presenting and sharing an Airhead Misfit bike, which is a custom R75/5, which is a pretty fun story and a really great rescue of a bike. I'm excited to share that one. I think to get started, we should probably just get into the garage updates. We'll get started on my end here. I am dealing with a number of electrical issues on the conversion bike. I think a few episodes ago, I had fixed the headlight. Somehow that managed to break the taillight. So I am chasing wires, trying to figure out what the previous owner did, why things aren't working the way they're supposed to. Currently, my headlight is sitting right here because this desk is not only my podcasting desk, but it's also where I put all of my parts as I remove them. Taillight as well. So still figuring that out. Trying to figure out what's going on there. What I did pick up is a new combination switch for the, hold on, let me think about this. It's on the left side.
Okay,
so
that's going to be turn signals and
high beam
lights. Yep.
These are available at Boxer 2 Valve, by the way, if you're in need of one. So this is a /5 model. The conversion bike, while it's a /2, it runs all /5 electronics, as well as the engine. So hopefully I'll be able to get that installed and maybe even before the next episode, but we'll see.
So I guess you're sort of hoping...
Daren, what do you have going on?
Well, let me ask you about that. So I guess you're in some way sort of hoping that switch installation might cure a few things that have been going on.
Yes. So the horn is definitely malfunctioning. I think about 3 or 4 months ago, I was on a ride and the horn just started going off on its own. And it was kind of hilarious. I was on a pretty busy street when it happened, of course, and there was cars all around me just staring at me, confused as to whether or not they had, cut me off or done something wrong. But no, the horn was just malfunctioning. So pulled over, disconnected the horn, zip tied the leads out of the way, and it's been hornless ever since. So hoping to fix that. And I don't think that the switch has anything to do with the taillight, but it's kind of one of those while you're in there situations. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have a number of wires apart inside the headlight. So it just seemed like the right time to try to fix that switch, which I believe is the reason that the horn was going on its own, is the switch has just reached its end of life. So,
okay. All right. So hopefully next time or in the next few weeks, your next garage update will include repair and moving on from that issue. That's what we're hoping for, right?
I hope so. It's getting to be prime riding season here in the fall in Colorado. Yeah. And right now I just don't really feel safe riding it with malfunctioning lights and horn.
Yeah. Well, totally legit. Okay. Garage update here from me, Nick. I've got a lot of things going on. First thing I want to mention is, so I got started a couple days ago. I wanted to get some heated grips on the Gold RS, on the 78 RS. And so I had some old wiring harnesses that I've been collecting for a long time that are actually legit for that year and model bike that are no longer available. And if we talk about this more, maybe we might put a link up to the heated grips install and something else I did, which was installing the 77 left-hand combination switch on the 78. So essentially what that does, everybody knows if you've got a 78 year model bike, the yellow switch for cutting your headlight on and off disappeared. 78, the headlight was on all the time. And so I happen to have the service bulletin for retrofitting the 77 switch on a 78. And we're going to post that up on the 247 website under the service bulletin section, as well as we've also got instructions on installing heated grips for /7 and /6, ostensibly motorcycles. So while doing that too, I also realized when I had that original left-hand combo switch, you know what? They're making new combination switches now. Somebody has come out with a reproduction. I'm not sure who's making it, but they're available at a number of different places. I think Boxer 2 Valve might even have them. I saw Ted Porter's carrying them. They're all over the place. I don't know who's making them. If anybody out there does, drop us a comment. I want to say it's Emerald Isle. I don't know. It seems I heard that somewhere. I'm not sure. Anyway, so my show and tell in the garage update in getting the heated grips on, getting the new the back fitting, the old left-hand combination switch, Nick. So the perch on the left-hand side, the clutch I have right here, the clutch perch. And a lot of you will know there right in this area here is where the clutch, the neutral safety switch goes. So you can squeeze the clutch and start the bike in gear with that switch working. Well, mine wasn't seating properly. I didn't know what was going on. The switch is in there, it works fine, but it's not seating and I'm not getting good action on it. Well, it turns out what had happened, this little piece somehow had snapped off. So it was just, I'm trying to show this here. Boy, this is difficult. Bear with me. Jeez Louise. Okay, here it is. All right. So normally it would be sitting there like this. Okay. And it had pushed itself up a little bit. And I'm looking at it thinking, boy, that's strange. It's got a weird angle or something on it. As soon as I grabbed it, it just popped off. So news to me, this clutch perch, left-hand side, for /7, /6, I guess. Maybe it's a little bit different. NLA. That's a new one on me. I was looking at what Max offered and other places offered this new, and it had, instead of just having the smooth top, it had the housing for the choke lever. So that's the only thing you can buy new from BMW now. For a left-hand clutch perch. So if you've got /6, /7 ones, those are now no longer available. And again, this is something that kind of brings us full circle to what we'll be talking about today with Mark Francois, was that we were just talking about a lot of the things, different parts on the R90S, and how a lot of things are becoming NLA over the years. But we're also bemoaning the fact that, hey, they're not making these combination switches anymore. Who's going to step up to the plate and do these? Well, here we are 2.5 years later. By golly, somebody else is doing it.
Love it. We got to figure out who it is so we can send them all the money.
Yeah, exactly. Have you seen them?
I've seen them online, but I haven't. I don't have one, and I don't have a bike like that, so I've not purchased one myself. But I have seen the ads floating around. But yeah, it'd be great to know who's doing it, just so we can send them some kudos at least.
And indeed, and I think really the big difference that you'll notice is there's no Hella stamp from the original manufacturer. So somebody on Adventure Rider posted that they had purchased one, and the one thing that he noticed was slightly different on it was the font on the white lettering. So the painted font, on the light, licked, whatever, all that kind of stuff on the switch. And I just thought, That's probably the easiest thing to get to copy is the font. How do you miss that? That's not that difficult. But of course, you can't put the Hella imprint on the unit itself. So, and that's buried on the back side. I think it's also on this perch. This is a Magura, but you can see there's the Magura logo, and I think on the switches to some degree, you really can't clearly see that Hella logo. You'd really have to look and notice. But anyway, as you said, Nick, yeah, kudos to whoever's doing that. There is definitely a market for those. And as we'll hear in this episode a little bit later, in part, we have Mark Francois to thank for buying up all the stock from those.
Well, I mean, he was creating the demand, right? I mean, if there's
exactly
someone out there
right.
buying them, if there's someone out there buying them by the dozen, then
yeah,
a company is going to respond.
Indeed. So that's my garage update.
That's too much. Love it. Great. Awesome. Glad that you're getting all that sorted out, and you'll have heated grips, because you've got some cooler temperatures settling in soon here
Indeed.
for you as well. So that's
Indeed.
great. Awesome. Well, I think what we have next is the Misfit bike. And so we'll just jump right into that. If you're not familiar with the Misfit bikes, it's an Instagram account that I run, Airhead Misfits. Check us out on Instagram. It's just at Airhead Misfits. What I do is I post a bike every other Friday now. It used to be every Friday, but I can't keep up. So every other Friday, I'm posting a Misfit bike, all user submitted. If you submit the bike, I will post it, and I will send you free stickers as a thank you. So find me on Instagram, and I will post your bike. This bike that we are talking about today, bear with me. He sent me, I think, something in the range of 20 photos and paragraphs of information about it, which is amazing. There's a great story behind this one. So I'm going to have to read my notes to get through this one.
That's
or
fine.
I will miss something.
That's fine.
But this is at 1ts.just, which is a really hard Instagram name to pronounce
yes.
In this setting. So we're going to go by his first name. It's Justin. Justin's 1970 BMW R75/5. So this is a barn find. I love stories like this. It's a true barn find. He spotted this bike tucked away under a pile of stuff while he was doing carpentry work for a man named Brooks. He left a note for Brooks, hoping that one day he'd be able to buy this bike. Unfortunately, years went by, and sadly, Brooks passed away. But eventually, Justin was able to connect with Brooks's mother, believe it or not, a woman named Jane, and she agreed to sell him the bike. And so he got the bike, and I'll be, sharing some photos here. So those of you who are listening, you'll be seeing photos as we go here of the bike's condition when Justin picked this up. It was pretty rough. So he buys this bike from Jane, and was kind of hoping it would just be a quick carb cleanup and that he'd be able to ride this thing. Nope. It was sitting outside for 25 years. It needed a lot of work. He had a broken valve, a corroded gearbox that from the pictures looks to me like it was submerged in the ocean at one point. Mm-hmm. Totally trashed cylinders. The Mikuni carbs that it had on it were totally a mess. He had a shattered cam follower.
Wow.
Which, man, I've never.
I mean, that happens, but
I think I've heard a rumor of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never seen any evidence of that actually happening, and you'll see a photo of it here. There was a broken valve spring and pinholes in the gas tank. So, I mean, this thing was left for dead. But he didn't care. He went at it, fixed everything. He decided to leave some of the wear and tear on the frame to kind of a little nod to the original bike itself, and leaned into a military inspired theme. So he painted the tank green, which is it's a really, really cool green color. I love that color. And he actually handmade leather knee pads for that /5 large tank to go in place of normally the black rubber ones that you would see. And they look great. And created some handcrafted panniers out of vintage military bags to kind of go along with that military theme. And then the part that I really love about this story is after he got it all back together and got it running again, he took it back to Jane and had lunch with her and showed her the bike. And she was absolutely blown away. She couldn't even believe that it was the bike that she sold him. And there's some photos of him and Jane with the bike, kind of posing there in front of, I would imagine it's her garage, but posing in front of a garage. So just love this. I love that this was a bike that for years just sat rotting away, and now Justin's got it. He's got it running, and based on his Instagram, he rides it all the time.
So Nick,
so what do you think about this, Daren?
Yeah, here's my few comments on this. First off, it sounds like this was really more a labor of love than anything. I'm curious, he might not have alluded to what his purchase price was, but we want to hope it was zero to not much, considering all the work he had to get done on that bike, right? But that's neither here nor there. I mean, you and I have spent more money on ridiculous things motorcycle wise, just as everybody else has. So I'm not being critical if he overpaid or anything. I'm just saying, hopefully, given all the work that bike needed, it was a reasonable buy-in price for him. The second thing I noticed, I really loved the leather work. You mentioned the knee pads he did on that. Very cool. I can imagine, in the photos we were looking at, it still looked relatively new. So just imagine after a few years, after those start to weather a little bit, I think those are going to look pretty sharp.
Yeah.
He also did a leather tool roll to complement that. So it looks like Justin's got some leather skills. And shameless plug, if you like leather tool rolls, turns out we've got them on the 247 website.
Yep.
Sure do. They're in the store. So a buddy of mine here in Mountain View made those. So if your plastic tool roll is seeing better days, check out what we've got on the 247 website. But he did a great job with his tool roll as well. The one sort of question mark I had on this, and when I looked at the original photos, it made a little bit more sense, was the no front fender. So he bought the bike without a front fender. He's riding the bike still without a front fender. So I'll let that slide. I don't know if he intends to put a front fender on. It seems silly not to have a front fender. That's where I'll leave that.
Yeah, the front fender, it's a dividing line in the Airhead community, isn't it?
I mean, I get the look.
Internet chatter about that.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the look. It doesn't look like he has a rear fender on there as well. From a practical standpoint, I mean, you live in the city, so if it's not raining and you're tootling around, it's probably not an issue. If I tried to ride around my place without a front fender, I would just be a strip of mud up from, like this in the front and the back. So to me, a fender's not an option. But anyway, yeah, what a job he did with that bike.
Yep, indeed. Yeah, it's gorgeous. That green color is one I haven't really seen before, and it complements the leather pads on the tank really well, and it's just overall a great job. Awesome job, Justin. Stoked that you shared it with us. As like I said in the beginning, he got some stickers for free for that. If you've got a bike you want to share, find me on Instagram, comment here on YouTube, and I will find a way to contact you, and we will get your bike shared, and we'll get you some stickers as well. And that's what we got for the Misfit bike this week. Daren, do you want to give us a little intro on the Mark Francois?
I do.
Excerpt coming?
I do. I mentioned earlier, we have an excerpt from Mark Francois, and this was sort of brought up to the fact that I was fiddling with switches. I mentioned earlier in the program, we talked about this, the new Repro switches are available, and I thought this was a great time to revisit a conversation we had with Mark over 2 years ago when we were bemoaning the fact that nobody was making reproduction switches. Well, here we are, fast forward a little over 2.5 years later, and they're making them once again. We also discuss a lot of R90S stuff. Of course, Mark is known for his R90S restorations. And we dig into parts differences over the years 74, 75, 76. And this is, as we do with this episode, we've narrowed it down to a specific topic, specifically Airhead related. So if you've not heard this episode, there is a longer version where we go into his history and discuss some other things outside of motorcycles. And of course, we'll get into more detail on other topics, Airhead related. But this is just a little bit more focused on that. And also, I thought this was germane as well. There have been a lot of R90Ss going on Bring a Trailer here recently, and we all know Mark's set the high water mark. His restoration a couple years ago sold for $60,000. And although you won't hear it in this episode, if you go back and listen to the full length podcast, you can hear us discuss Bring a Trailer and values and how his sale may or may not have affected just the R90S market in general. So some great stuff from Mark Francois, one of the preeminent restorers out there, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Just gorgeous work. So before we throw to that, though, I think I know your answer to this question based on your background.
Yes.
but based on what's sitting behind you.
Yes.
What's your preferred paint scheme on the R90S?
Well, you're looking at it there. If I can twist it over a little bit. 100%. Yeah. The Daytona orange, for me, it's hard to beat. I mean, if anybody's seen some of the pictures I've been posting on Adventure Rider, and we've talked about the green /6 I bought, I'm all about those kind of colors from the 70s. And I don't think anything screams mid 70s more than a Daytona orange R90S. The silver smoke is great. I think it's, we heard in a Hans Muth interview, that's his preferred color, which is fine. But the orange just really, that's my deal. And mine's a 75 back there.
So I am on Hans's side of this argument. I am a fan of the silver smoke, but I am a fan of black and things that are light black. So it fits my my general color scheme, my palette of life, if you will. I didn't live through the 70s, so I missed out on the debut of that bike in Daytona Orange. And so it might not have quite the nostalgic feel for me, but I remember the first time I saw a silver smoke R90S when I first started to get into airheads, and I thought, man, that thing is cool. I need to have one of those at some point. So I'm silver smoke. I'd love to hear what our listeners are interested in or what they like, I should say. So comment down below. Let's see what our listeners like, whether it's Daytona orange or silver smoke, or maybe you've got another color you like even better, some custom color. I don't know. Let us know. But
let me throw one thing out there, Nick, before we join Mark. There is a third color on the R90S. You have to do some put your Google foo on to find it. But a lot of folks may remember the movie Return of the Pink Panther with Peter Sellers. That was released in 1975, and there is a scene where one of the characters, who strangely enough is dressed in drag, rides one of these motorcycles up to a house. And the neat thing about that scene in the movie is they did not use a stock motorcycle sound. It is the actual audio of the R90S. It's plain to hear. It's the correct motor sound. So often in the movies, they'll just get some other Foley artist, and anybody who knows these motorcycles could tell if they had dubbed in the incorrect sound. Anyway, so this bike, when it was new in 75, product placement in the Pink Panther movie. I invite you to check that out if you've never seen it. However, what also was done, apparently, I don't know if BMW did this, somebody did. There is an actual pink smoke R90S that was made to commemorate this motorcycle's appearance. So it's a pink silver smoke. So check it out on Google somewhere. maybe I'm putting you on the spot here, Nick. Maybe you can zip up a picture of it. Maybe not. If you can find it online somewhere, I can send it to you. But if we don't
I'll
show it here,
certainly try. I'll certainly try.
it is on Google. So there is a third, albeit a highly custom color, and I think I would pass on the pink myself.
I'm going to reserve my opinion until I can have a look, but I have a feeling that I'll stick with the silver smoke.
Perfect. All right.
Excellent.
Well, that does
speaking
it.
Speaking of
that does it for me.
Yeah. Speaking of things in the bottom, I'll also put the links in for the full Mark Francois episode. I will try to put a link in there for the service bulletins that you mentioned. I have quite a few links for all of you, so check out the description below if you need those links. And in the meantime, just enjoy the episode from Mark Francois. See you later.
We've teamed up with the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America to offer a special membership deal for our listeners. Now, before you think, wait a second, Daren, how much is this going to cost? Let's just stop right here and say it's free. This is a complimentary 1-year digital membership for Airhead 247 podcast listeners. The MOA has a goal of adding 200 new members over the next several months. That's a lot, but I think they can reach that goal with our help. By supporting the MOA with this offer, you are also supporting this program. And let's say this again, it is free of charge. Visit 247.bmwmoa.org and complete the online form using the activation code Airhead247. That's easy to remember. You'll receive your free 1-year digital membership, and that will give our program credit for referring you. Or go to the description section of this podcast. We've got a direct link right there. Membership in the MOA offers discounts at hotels, a monthly magazine, great deals on roadside assistance programs, plus a fantastic network of BMW owners that share your passion. All this, plus you're supporting our efforts here with the podcast, bringing you unique insight into the world of the 247 Airhead. That website, once again, for your free 1-year digital membership, 247.bmwmoa.org. Use the code Airhead247. Thank you very much for your support. Okay, we're on the line with Mark Francois. And Mark, thanks for taking some time to visit with us on the Airhead 247 podcast. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
All right, let's talk a little bit about just airheads in general, and go back maybe to the beginning for you. We don't need to go through your whole sort of motorcycle history and all that kind of stuff. But what, in general, what was your sort of introduction to airheads, and then how did the R90S find the sweet spot in your heart?
You know, serendipity. That's all I can say. When at my last job before I retired in 2013, there was a guy there who was really into BMW motorcycles, and I had mentioned that when I retired, I wanted to do a motorcycle project, and he said you should consider, a BMW, and I didn't know anything about BMWs, and I asked him what kind of models people, really wanted. And he says, well, pay attention. If you can find something called an R90S, that's what you want to buy. So, and when I retired, I went on to online eBay and started looking at German bikes, Japanese bikes, British, Italian, vintage bikes to buy. And lo and behold, in the German section was an R90S. And so I ended up buying that, and that's how it all started. It really was just, I didn't know anything about them back then, and it was lucky to find one right in front of me the first time I looked. And as I started researching it and looking at the bike, its status and history, as a historic significance, I realized, and the beautiful paint jobs that they had. I thought, yeah, this is for me. So I bought that first one. I restored it, sold it for a ridiculously low amount of money, pretty much broke even, but felt that I had done something that I wanted to do, which was take a very nice old machine and put it back on the road for somebody to enjoy.
So I made some notes here about a lot of the sort of, 1 year part anomalies. The badges are a great example there. I have a 75 Daytona Orange that's in original paint. It was built in January of 75, and it does not have the aluminum badges.
Right.
And so I did what I call, a mechanical refreshing on it a couple years after I bought it. And one thing I was finding was, and I know you've come across this, and that's why I was really looking forward to chatting with you about this, was, of course, we all know during the production run, parts were updated and changed throughout those 3 to 4 years that they made the motorcycles. Two things and there's a lot we can talk about here. Two of them that sort of grabbed me by mistake were the flywheel bolts and the neutral switch. And the reason that happened to me was I was using the Max BMW parts fish, and parenthetically, thank you, Max. This is I'm not putting your parts fish down, but a lot of times they'll show a line
of people, by the way.
Oh yeah, they're great. And I want to talk about their bike that they did a few years back too, but they'll show a lot of times a line of demarcation as 9/75, September 75, as when a lot of parts were changed over. Now, as you mentioned with the tank badges and the seat cowl badge, that is not a hard working date. I noticed the two things I had on mine. I was expecting to have the longer, thinner flywheel bolts, and also I was expecting to have the earlier model neutral switch. So I ordered those parts because my bike was a January 75, and lo and behold, those were not the right ones. So I don't know that somebody may have been in there before, but it was a pretty low mileage bike, under 30,000 miles. So tell me that those are just a couple examples I run into there. You mentioned the tank badges. There's a lot of other ones in there too that you really have to kind of keep your eye out for. Let me start asking with the 73 and 74 models. Especially, of course, those are going to be in the Silver Smoke. Have you done one of those, and talk about maybe the difficulty in finding some particular parts for those bikes?
I've actually done 2 74s completely restored, and having just as a funny aside, after my first 74, I swore that I would never do another 74, and after the second 74, I swore that I would never do another 74, and I think I mean it this time. And it's only because exactly what you say. I once compiled a list of all the unique features of a 74 R90S, and it's fairly long, and a lot of being a 1 year only batch of parts, it's sort of two edges on the sword. It's, on the one hand, it's a very difficult restoration because a lot of the parts you have to wait until they come up if you need them. And the other side of it is, to me, it makes the 74 R90S the most beautiful of the 3 years. It's very unique, very special. But what I find in the marketplace right now is that the appreciation for the 74 is fairly low, which surprises me when you think about the most valuable 911 Porsches are the ones from 1965, which is their first year 911. So over time, I expect the 74 R90S to overtake all the 75 and 76 in terms of value. So having said that, I probably have just priced myself out of a third 74 R90S, but that's just my expectation over time because it is so unique. And when you deal, I only deal in U.S. spec bikes. I don't buy ECU bikes, which carry a different serial number sequence
Right.
versus the U.S. specs. And the U.S. spec bike for a 74 is the rarest of them all, as they only made 1,005 of them.
Oh, okay. I didn't know the production numbers were that low.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask.
1,005.
Yeah, wow. Okay. I wanted to ask you about the Delorto carbs on the R90S, especially the early models. I've read a few things and heard a few people mention this, but I never knew this to be the case, and I might have glossed over it in the Ian Falloon book. But some of the early Delorto carbs on the first models those did not have chokes, and they had tickler chokes on there. Is that right?
That I can't completely confirm. I mean, that is not my experience. But I've only owned, I've owned 3 74 R90Ss, 2 I've restored. One was an ECU bike, and it was an early bike. I believe it was a November, if I'm thinking right, a November 73 build. And it had, its carburetors had the standard choke mechanism.
Okay. All right.
Megara choke. So I have not yet ever come across an R90S with ticklers on it. I know they're out there. I know they exist, and I know that some people have converted them in the past. But I have not seen any from the factory like that. But that doesn't mean that I've seen it all by any stretch.
So on those 274s that you did, what were some of the challenges on those? Maybe either finding parts or some areas where you really might have been struggling or had to be patient to get some of those aspects how you wanted it.
I would say that one of the issues was the gold tape. As you know, the 74, the majority of the bikes in 74 were not pinstriped with paint. They were pinstriped with gold tape. So finding a tape that was similar enough to be able to be used in terms of its gold color and its width was a bit of a challenge. I finally found some in China, of all places, and that was only the first part of the battle. The second part of the battle was actually putting the tape down and getting it to stick. I went through, all kinds of cleaning the tank with alcohol and heating the tank with a hair dryer and to get the tape to stick a little bit better. It was probably one of the more challenging features of that. And then I was fortunate that the first R90S I had, that was the 74, was, as I mentioned, it was a one owner estate, purchase. So I could look at all of the aspects of where the tape goes down, where it's laid down on it. And interestingly, when you look at a pinstriped 75 and 76 that actually has paint, the paint dives in and ends in a certain place. But when you have a taped fairing, for example, or a taped gas tank, the tape doesn't dive into anything. It actually wraps around to the underside of whether it's the fairing or the gas tank for support.
Yeah, it sort of disappears from the line of sight.
Well, yeah, and like on the lower part of the fairing, down by where the turn signals are, the tape down there dives and goes and wraps around to the inside of the fairing. So there were just a lot of things like that. I think the transmissions are a little finicky on a 74. The first time I took one apart, figuring out how to get the Kickstarter spring reloaded was, an hour's worth of challenge, and a fairly dangerous endeavor, because you try to wind this spring, and if you're not careful, that spring can unwind and it'll take a pretty good gash out of your finger. Didn't happen, but it could possibly do that.
Well, let me ask you too about that then. So, in sticking with the first year model, you mentioned the transmission. That is something that was changed over the model year run, 75 and 76. It was, some of those parts were updated. I know some of the parts in the transmission, some of the shafts and maybe gears might not be available anymore. If you were doing another 74, would you up and you couldn't find the parts, or maybe you had to wait for them or something or whatever, would you still go back and put in the correct transmission parts for that, or would you update it towards the better version?
Well, first of all, the intermediate shaft.
That's what I was
no longer. Yeah, it's no longer available from BMW. The other gears are available, with the exception of fifth gear, which is a little bit different. It has a different ratio today, and so when you do that, you've got to change out the gear on the input shaft that will match that. So there's, as I recall, when I built that first 74 transmission, I did have a problem. You've probably heard the adage in the airhead world is that only use your Kickstarter when it's an emergency.
That's right.
And that is because the spur gear on the kicker rotates a small gear that's on the input shaft, and that gear is super soft. And just using it 10 times, you'll create wear on that gear on the input shaft. And what happens is they get so worn that they stop making really good contact, and they start stripping out. And of course, there's two obvious bad problems with that. You can't start the bike, and you're depositing, metal debris in the transmission. So I was lucky. I had there's a gentleman in Montana, and his name is Bob, and I forget his last name, but he's.
I want to say it's Bob Clement or Clement.
Bob Clement, yeah, I have his card right here, and he's been a very good mentor to me on building transmissions. So, and so he actually helped me source an NOS gear that goes on the input shaft. So I was pretty pleased about that. But short of that, you're in a dilemma. If you want to build the correct transmission for a 74, you can build it. If the gear on the input shaft is completely worn, then you can, it'll look correct from the outside. And you just, you'll have to be disclosing to the customer, never use the kicker, which I basically have told people when I built the 74s, don't use the kicker unless it's an emergency anyway. So,
well, let me ask you, or ask that question again then. So, would you have conniption fits? Could you sleep at night if you had an updated transmission parts 76 or something like that, transmission parts in a 74 transmission? Would that bother you?
If they're the same gears, no, not at all. I mean, I've heard that the 74 transmission was fairly weak compared to the 5 and 6. But honestly, when you ride them around, it's difficult to figure out where that weakness is, whether it's shafts or gears or the aluminum case itself. I couldn't tell you where that is, but there isn't. The gears off of a later model should fit and work with the 74, as far as I know. I could be wrong on that. That's not something I've had to do at this point. And I've got a fairly good supply of shafts and gears, as backup in the cupboard.
So that's something you probably wouldn't even have to worry about then. So, okay, fair enough. What about some other components like that? Again, maybe sticking with the 74 as an example, there were a lot of things that were updated, as we know, through the model run that were, improvements to the bike. But again, if you were doing 100% correct restoration, you might not do those. So things like the breather valve, needle bearings on the rocker arms, electronic ignition, things like that. you're not going to be even considering those when you're doing a period correct restoration. Is that right?
That's pretty much correct. Yeah. I mean, I want to take the bike to as close to stock as possible. You mentioned electronic ignition. I'm not familiar with any of these bikes having electronic ignition.
Sure.
And typically, more often than not, when I buy a core, it has a Dyna 2 or a Dyna 3 ignition system on it. I can't even tell you how many of those I have in the drawer.
I believe it.
I convert the bike back to stock. Another piece on the ignition is the dual plugging. I come across that a lot. I've found that a oil drain plug for a Jeep is a very good fit to the lower plug if you want to close that off, and it has such a low profile to the head of that drain plug, it won't interfere with trying to access the bolts that hold the head onto the cylinder.
No, that's an interesting note. Good to know.
Yeah.
What are we? Go ahead.
You have to cut them down a little bit so they don't stick into the cylinder. But it's basically just finding a 14 by 125 bolt that will fit and have a really low profile head to it.
One of the great things about owning a classic 247 is taking pride in maintaining and repairing the motorcycle yourself. For some of us, yours truly included, there are some jobs that are better left to specialists. For me, transmission repair, that is one of those jobs. Airhead transmissions, they're mostly robust until they're not. Then, eventually, they're going to need some attention. That's where George Thomas and Air Support BMW come in. From repairing broken shift dogs, pawl springs, or adding a circlip, Air Support BMW knows how to repair your transmission and get it right the first time. Maybe you want to add a shorter first gear and taller fifth to your GS, or updating the shift kit on an older model to an improved later setup. George and Air Support BMW has got you covered. To get a quote on transmission repair or any other mail-in driveline repair, check in with George at airsupportbmw.com. One of the reasons so many airheads are still on the road today is because of great parts suppliers and enthusiasts like Boxer 2 Valve. William and Edward Plam at Boxer 2 Valve have years of experience with the 247 Airhead, dating back to their first repair shop and dealership in the early 1980s. Boxer 2 Valve stocks and sources only premium parts and tools, so no need to worry if you're getting a cheap pattern or shortcut part. They simply don't carry them. Boxer 2 Valve has extensively researched which parts are correct for your motorcycle. Just enter your year and model, and you'll see only the parts that fit your bike. That takes the guesswork out of the ordering process. Real-time stock information that is also available, so no need to guess what may be on back order that could delay your project. Also, if you're digging into a repair for the first time, be sure to check out Boxer 2 Valve's video repair series. These cover both twin shock and post-81 models and are great tutorials that go step by step through a variety of repairs and parts replacement procedures. The video series is a great workshop companion, one I've used many times over the years. So, for all your Airhead parts needs, Boxer2Valve.com. That's the number 2, Boxer2Valve.com. I want to talk a little bit about parts availability, and sort of your preferences. A lot of guys I've been talking to who've been working with these bikes for 20 or 30 years now are noticing more and more, and not surprisingly, more and more parts are coming up NLA on the BMW parts catalog. A lot of things, you're just not able to find anymore. I recently bought a 78 gold 78 R100 RS, and the rear master cylinder for the disc brake on that bike was it had seen a lot better days in a lot of areas. The worst part about it was the threads where the hard brake line went in were pretty stripped, and I thought, well, I could probably stand for a new one here, or find another source. So sure enough, I get on Max. It's listed as available. It's kind of a ridiculous price, I think, as you can imagine some things are. But to make sure, I called up the parts guy, called up the parts counter there at Max and said, hey, I'm looking at this. Before I place my order, can you double check and make sure this is still available? And sure enough, he said, well, sorry, it's not, and I'm going to go ahead and update our parts fish right now. So there's slowly but surely things are disappearing. But at the same time, manufacturers like Cybenrock are slowly reintroducing parts, not necessarily for the R90S, but other airheads. And then there are a lot of great used parts dealers, especially in Germany. Cybenrock's now offering parts. BMW Bayer, B-A-Y-E-R, I might be mispronouncing. That's another one. So tell me sort of about your experience with parts availability, maybe some that have been difficult to find over the years or more recently. And then if you are having to outsource, this is like a 30-point question here, but and if you are having to use maybe a non-BMW part, if you have to, what are they and what's your preference there?
So, yeah, all of the above. I've had, my builds, I start with a big, I go over the bike, examine it, figure out, and I start making notes on what do I need. And I place a very large order with Max, BMW. And you're right, I've started noticing things going away. I'm sure that to some degree I'm responsible for part of the in LA. I did a restoration on a 75 a number of years ago, and I was still able to buy Hella switch controls on the left and right. I was still able to buy the header pipes and the correct Zuna exhaust systems.
Yep.
So, and of course, all of that stuff is gone. So as you pointed out, once you realize that you're in LA on your most convenient source, then you branch out and you start getting creative. And I've been to BMW Bayer. I've been to a number of other suppliers in Germany to buy. S. Meyer is one.
Yep.
Cybenrock is another. To get what you need. And to the extent that you can't find that, then you reach, for the eBay or whatever other market you have. Your friends. I have a lot of friends. I have a friend who's got a couple of warehouses of parts. So you start massaging it that way. And there are some parts that are just really hard to come by now. And, the Hella switch controls are one of them. Horns on the 74 and 75 horns are hard to come by.
Is that the one with the chrome center piece?
Correct. And when I say hard to come by, it's hard to come by one that's in show quality. And so I'm now resorting to taking horns apart and having the bells re-chromed.
So have you used a non-original BMW part on a restoration just because you didn't have another option?
Let's see.
And I'm trying to struggle with what it might be.
The answer is probably yes, but I'm trying to remember what it might be. So I typically, I don't use Kolbenschmidt pistons.
Okay.
In the bike. I use Derstner pistons out of Germany. And why I do that is because it's a more modern setup in terms of reliability. If you know anything about oil lands on a piston, a single piece oil land is inferior to a more modern three-piece system that does a better job of scraping the cylinder wall. So I use those pistons, and you get the benefit of reduced reciprocating mass. The piston, the rings, the wrist pin, the keepers of a Versner system is 196 grams lighter per side than the Kolbenschmidt setup. So it tends to make for a little bit smoother, engine. Is it stock? No, but I do think it's a much better system, and you just have less oil blow by, because you know from these breather valves you get a little bit of oil trickling down through the breather port into your right side suction funnel, and then that goes in and gets burned up in the carburetor.
Yep.
Or in the carburetor, delivered by the carburetor into the cylinder. So it's just a little bit better, setup for that. So that would be one thing. I don't use I'm using Kibble White black diamond valves because I think they're a little bit better, a little bit harder than the stock valves from BMW. But I use BMW guides. I use BMW springs, all factory standard stuff. That's about all I can think of. So
more so internal, engine components more so than anything else. I was going to say, have you done do you always keep an iron bore cylinder, or have you done any nickel seal conversions?
Always iron.
Okay.
The iron bores on these bikes are unbelievable. And that's, that I think I alluded to this earlier in the discussion, that it took me a while I didn't know what I was looking at when I bought my first R90S. And over time, I began to have a great appreciation for the quality of the materials that were used in these bikes versus, say, a Honda, a 750 of the same, generation. My dad passed away a couple of years ago, and I'm the recipient of his 1972 Honda CB750 that is 100% original.
Oh, wow.
With less than 20,000 miles on it. And I look at the quality of the chrome, the quality of the rubber components on the bike. I mean, it's just so different than a BMW. A BMW is a much higher quality product. I mean, you can take rubber parts that are 45 years old and clean them, and they're still pliable in your hand. Chrome will look like it's got some pitting or rust on it, and you can scrape that off with your fingernail. Not that that's how I do my restorations, but I'm just making a generalization of the quality. And where I was leading with this is the iron linings in these bikes. I've actually taken apart a cylinder, and for kicks, I put a bore gauge to it, a cylinder that had 65,000 miles on it. I put a bore gauge to it to see if it would still be in spec on taper and out of round, and it was. How's that? That is an amazing testimonial to how well these bikes have been built and the quality of the materials.
Yeah, that's true. One last thing on the sort of parts availability and stuff. You mentioned the switches, the handlebar switches, and like you, obviously, the ones on my bike are fine. I'm not doing restorations like you, but admittedly, when I see one come up, I do have a second thought. Hey, should I buy one and stash this away in case I have a failure, one of the
hard down though.
Exactly.
Yeah. My recommendation to you is that you do not, because I will need to buy that.
I hear you. That's a good one. Has there been any talk? I guess what I'm trying to ask here is, I wonder if Cyberrock or somebody is going to step up and start reproducing some of these, more important NLA parts. Do you know of anybody that's talking about that? Any hubbub about it, or what?
I'm not. I do not know of anybody at this point in time. I am not personally doing that. I foresaw the shortage coming several years ago, so I purchased ahead. I actually have, but I don't have enough to keep me going forever. I've got, I think, 6 switches on the left side, and I've got probably 14 on the right side. I was fortunate enough to find a supplier in Greece that the Greek police used to ride around on these bikes all the time, and there was all these part stashes. And a number of years ago, a guy I knew over there turned me on to someone who was selling parts that were left over from the Greek police vehicles.
Wow, interesting. You never know where they'll pop up.
That's exactly right. So, but I think it'll happen. I mean, if you look at BMW Mobile Traditions, they've been involved with this. Others have been involved with this. We're starting to see more and more parts, come available. There's a fella that's a parts guy on eBay in San Pedro, California. He just now started reproducing the unique handlebar clamps that have a little bright spears.
Yep.
So those are now being reproduced. So we'll see it, necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. So as
100%.
the need arises, we'll start to see some of that.
100%.
People have said that they've contacted Hella. Hella is the manufacturer of the old combination switches, and Hella to this point apparently has not had interest in doing that. But we'll see. I mean,
they had a hell of a time getting Hella to make them. I'm sorry, that was a terrible pun.
Yeah, that's all right.
Well, and let me say this, and to bring this sort of full circle, when we're seeing bikes like yours that are going for good sale prices, the collectability factor continues to stay strong. The sales prices overall continue to stay strong. The appeal for the bikes to stay strong. I think all in all, that's going to mean at some point somebody's going to jump in and do this because they still see there's a need, a want, and a value for these parts.
Yeah, absolutely. It may be me too. I mean, depending on how much longer I go, and when I start running low on this or that. I have friends in the industry who are big restorers. I think Tim Stafford is another one of the mentors that I've had in this area. He's very big on 1969 and earlier type restorations, but he's definitely going to be in the market to look at restoring R90Ss. He's working on his first one as we speak. It's a 1974 model. He'll be taking that to the Quail. Calls me all the time for advice and, hey, how do you do this, or how's that supposed to look, or, kind of a thing. So, but he has a lot of experience with reaching out and getting things made, whether it's in China or whether it's from a local person, So I think as the need arises, there's plenty of expertise out there that can get it done.
All right, look, Mark, this has been a great conversation. So much.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, so much to talk about with the R90S. I've been so impressed with what you've done with these R90Ss over the years. It's guys like you that keep the interest up and that sort of, I think, drive, as I mentioned before, drive the hobby so that'll continue on for years to come. So keep up the good work. And who knows, I may email you one day if I see if I can't pry a part out of your stash.
All right. Well, you can try. You have my contact.
I'll try. Thanks for joining us on the Short Wheelbase podcast, presented by the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America. To join the club, visit bmwmoa.org. You can find full-length episodes of the excerpts heard here on the Airhead 247 podcast. The Short Wheelbase podcast is produced and edited by Nick Malozzi. Audio segments by Jeff Glover. You can check in with Nick at Airhead Misfits on Instagram.